Right, so I have it in mind. Baruch atah Adonai lin melech lameshik rishan v'mitzvotav v'tzivanu l'suk b'divrei Torah v'arev na Adonai lohine divrei Toratcha b'finu ובפי עמך בית ישראל ונהיה אנחנו וצאצאינו וצאצאי עמך בית ישראל כולנו יודעי שמך ולומדי תורתך לשמה ברוך אתה אדוני מלמד תורה לעמו ישראל ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהים מלך העולם אשר בכבוד מכל עמים ונתן לנו תורתו ברוך אתה אדוני נותן התורה. So we're on page 582 of the Gemara, and yesterday we dealt with why damage to produce that's not discernible is not something Rav Oshia discussed. It's from Rav Chia. And we discussed that two things, that their quantity wasn't lost and that the taste wasn't discernible. It's more spiritual of nature. But if you're tasting it, a Chardonnay still tastes like a Chardonnay. It doesn't taste like a vinegar, and it wasn't spilt out. So again, those three forms of damage is one who contaminates somebody's produce with tumah, one who mixes teruma into somebody's ordinary produce, and one who renders somebody's one nesech, which is for idol worship practice, which cannot be used. In any of those cases, you either can't use it, or in the case of teruma, you can only sell it to kohanim, so the value of what you can sell, you're going to get far less, because there's only a small segment of the population that might be interested and their budget is limited. Right. Now, we're in the point where we discussed that there seems to be like something wrong with the list. It seems to be missing something. So let me just tell you, there's a principle in the Talmud that says the minute something is numbered, it's coming to tell you it's part of a list. Okay? Because otherwise then you don't have to name it. You could just say these are the damages, right? So, for example, when you mention in Keren, Shain, and Regel, you say these are the damages. You don't turn around and say, well, these are the 4 Toldot, or these are the 5 Toldot, or these are the number of primary categories, etc., etc. This is a principle in the Talmud. So when we discuss all the Toldots of the Avos, we just mention them. And the same thing we do with regards to the Avos. So in the beginning, do you remember it said these are the 4 Avos of the Mishnahs? Because if you remember what this chapter is called, it's called Arba Avos, which means the 4 Avos. So what the Gemara is coming to say now is that the minute it's mentioning a total number, it means that it's part of a greater sum of numbers. Otherwise, why mention the fact that it's a number? Am I making sense so far? Or not really? If not, I'll explain it more detail.
It is very clear, Dan.
So what happens now is as follows. Let me put this into action. Is when we say there's 4 damages in the Mishnah, the 4 damages is ox, pit, mave, and fire. Okay? But we're saying that in total it's 4, which means what it's coming to mention is that there's still another 9 from Rav Oshia. And what are those extra 9? You've got apart from the nezek, which is the actual damage, you've got pain, medical bills, which is the refuah, the convalescing, which is the shevet, and the humiliation in certain cases. So that's another 5, that's 9. And then you've got the 4 custodians, the paid custodian, the unpaid custodian, the borrower, and the renter. That's 13 in total. So the first 4 is coming to show it's 4 out of something, 4 out of a total number. And then when it says Rav Oshia, we say it's 13. Now, why mention 13? Why just not say these are the damages? Because it's coming to show Rav Oshia's list is missing because he doesn't include some of the cases of Rav Chia. So what is Rav Chia's total? Rav Chia's total is an additional 9 damages. Not 9 damages, 11 damages. What's the point of it? Because what other damages does he add? Double payment, 4-fold, 5-fold payment, thief, robber, zomimim witnesses, rapist, seducer, slanderer, one who renders teruma tameh, one who mixes teruma in chulin, one who renders another's one nesech. Okay? So in that particular case, that is a total of what? We're dealing with now a total of 24. But the problem is it's still saying that there are 24 avos. So what's that coming to imply? Based on what I've said now? Guys, what's it coming to imply? If I say Rav Chia's got 24, it's coming to imply that something is missing. He didn't include one or two things on his list. Otherwise,
but does he not have the 13 plus the 11?
Yes, but what I'm saying is something different. There's a Talmudic principle that states as follows: that whenever there's a list is prefaced by a number, it indicates that there are other items which are excluded from the list. So in other words, just for the fact that we say, because what we should have said is Rav Oshaya has got a list of 13 damages, and he took 13 damages off Rav Chia's list. The minute we say Rav Chia's list has 24, we're saying that even Rav Chia's list is missing one or two items. That's a Talmudic principle. It's coming to exclude one or two cases. Otherwise, there'd be no need to say that Rav Chia's list totals 24. You just say these are 13 out of the total. So what is it coming to exclude? This is what the Gemara is trying to ask, because this is a Gemara principle, that whenever there's a number there in terms of a list, it means it's a list as part of a total whole. Does that make sense? It's not a serious issue. It indicates that the other items excluded from the list. So the Gemara is asking, what of Rav Chia's list is missing? And how do we know something's missing? Is because his list is numbered. If I've got stock in my fridge, and I say, guys, I'm giving you a whole list, and here are a certain number of items, you can deduce something's missing. Does that make sense? Yeah. So what's it coming to exclude? It's coming to exclude an informer. So let's just discuss what an informer is. An informer is one who informs upon a fellow Jew to the pagan authorities, causing his property to be confiscated. So it's generally a moser, and that means to hand over. That's the literal meaning of the word moser. So because the slanderer is guilty of handing over his fellow's property to the authorities. Now, it's not that person personally gains, but he gets some sort of satisfaction out of seeing that person's property confiscated. So this is according to Rashi what an informer is. Okay? He doesn't say that the person gets a satisfaction, but since they don't gain, they obviously get a satisfaction because it doesn't go to them. So it's obviously quite punitive. And then there's another thing mentioned, which is called pigul. I don't know if, Gavin, you remember learning about pigul in Sanhedrin.
No, I don't. I definitely didn't learn about it.
Okay, so pigul, I think, in a certain opinion, where I think you might have, is in a case where Kohanim get the death penalty. They get the death penalty for certain things that they do on purpose.
I don't recall it. I mean, I stand to correction, but it's a very unique name, that pigul. I would have remembered.
Okay, well, you can remember that pig literally means rejected. Think of the word pig. That's how I remember it. So pigul is, think of the word pig, and it literally means rejected. So let me tell you what it's rejecting. It's rejecting the time issue. So let me give you the case like this, right? Because a pigul means you have to, the Kohen has to actually consume the slaughter for a chatas in a certain period of time. So he's got a day and the following night to consume the chatas. So let me explain to you how it works. There's 4 essential blood avodos. So the one is slaughtering the animal. The other one is receiving the blood. You know, they take it in a container. The other one is conveying the blood. I think putting all the blood together from maybe more than one sacrifice. I don't know what they mean by conveying it to the altar and throwing the blood in the altar. Okay? And that was performed with the intent of eating or sacrificing the meats after that period of time. So in other words, with a chatas offering, you offer it to Hashem, and the Kohen could enjoy a portion of it. Remember that the Kohanim and the Levim were teruma. The concept of teruma means that you gave part of your tzedakah to the Kohen. So when, for example, the Kohen gave a sacrifice on behalf of an individual to Hashem for a chatas, for a sin offering, you didn't sacrifice all of the meat. Some of the meat was to feed the Kohen. Does that make sense? So in a case where he consumed it longer than he should have, because it had to be eaten within a day and the following night. If he ate it within 2 days and the intervening night, which is the longer time span than the shalamim was allowed, that renders the sacrifice pigul. So in other words, what happened is the Kohen owes him for that money. Because he could, I don't know if it worked where he used part of its tzedakah money as part of it, but from the point that it's a chatas offering, it seems that for the sin offering, that entire bull was sacrificed, and most of it would go on the altar, and some of it would go to the Kohen as payment for performing the service. That he wasn't really paid, but he could enjoy meat and survive. But if he ate it after the prescribed deadline, or sacrificed the meat after the prescribed deadline, he owed the money for that to the person that gave it in good faith. And so what we want to know here is, why did Rav Chia not mention it? Now, one of the reasons why Rav Chia doesn't mention it is he doesn't talk about kodashim. Kodashim is anything that affects holy vessels or sacrificial sort of damages. That's a different category in his own. So all he talks about here is man damaging man, or man's property damaging man, or man's property damaging man's property, or man damaging a property. But anything to do with kodashim, Rav Chia doesn't discuss. It's not, for example, that you don't pay back on such a thing, but it's not the subject of this particular discussion. You know, there are other areas in which this is discussed, but not this particular Mishnah for starters. So we understand that. That makes sense. But it seems like what's the issue with an informer? Because with an informer, you could say that, listen, there's no kodashim involved here. It's very straightforward. This guy spoke to the authorities and got this other Jew's property confiscated. He should pay it back. So why doesn't Rav Chia teach it as a primary damager? Okay. Do any of you have a suggestion that you think it could be?
I don't know.
Okay. Kev, Gav?
No, I'm not sure.
Okay. So what we studied in Sanhedrin, which is a discussion on its own, is that generally something has to have as Kevin likes to use the word miser, cats and miser. So a miser is an action. An informer doesn't actually do an action. It's his speech that causes this damage. And I'm not saying that you don't pay for damage through speech, but Rav Chia doesn't list it. He doesn't discuss speech damage. Now, something sounds very, very off here. What sounds off? Did we not discuss 2 cases of damage caused by speech before, which Rav Chia brought? We did. What were those 2 cases, guys? Guys?
Yeah.
Okay, should I put you out of your misery?
Please.
Yeah, put us out of misery.
Please.
Okay. So the first case is a slanderer. A slanderer is a husband that accuses his wife of adultery and gets false witnesses, etc. And he also testifies against his wife. Now that's speech, isn't it? And it's part of Rav Chia's list.
Okay.
So why is that included? And there's a very, very specific reason. It's because there has to be an action involved, meaning that it's only discussed if he consummated the marriage with his wife. Yeah. And that act of bia, which is sexual intercourse, consummates the marriage. Remember, marriage is invalidated if no consummation takes place. So they might have to get a divorce in terms of the law, but it might not be, I'm not sure, but it might not be adultery, inverted commas, the same way, because he never consummated the marriage legitimately. So the action of consummating the marriage legitimately is a form of action. And even if you say maybe it is a form of adultery, A marriage to be valid needs certain things. It needs a ketubah, it needs a declaration, and it needs a consummation of actual sexual intercourse. And therefore, a husband is not treated as a slanderer unless he consummated the marriage before his slanderous accusations. So besides the speech, he performed an action. This is according to both Rashi and Tosfot. Okay. So it leaves you with one other case that should perplex you. What other case did we talk about speech where a person causes damage, guys? And we weren't sure. I'm going to give you tell me off.
What about those guys conspiring against you?
Exactly.
Adam Zimmerman.
Exactly. Well done, Arthur. Kevin did add the Hebrew, but Arthur was the first one on the point. Mate, that was awesome. So it's the Adam Zimmerman, the conspiring witnesses. That's exactly it. So in that particular case, it's speech, isn't it? It is. So why would you think that, and it doesn't involve an act, it's purely speech. So, and Rav Chia teaches that. So why does he mention that and not a case of a slanderer if they're both speech? So this is a thing that unless you did Makot, you would know, or unless you dealt with Adam Zomamim in Sanhedrin, you would know. I don't think Gavin was there at the time. Or Gavin was, but he might not remember. Gavin, do you remember or not?
Well, let's see. I don't recall anything at this stage.
If you do remember, take a stab at it.
No, I don't remember anything at this stage. No, that might come back to me when you say it.
Okay. So listen, there's a term that, and this term is, let me just give you the biblical source, in Deuteronomy chapter 19, verse 19. Firstly, I want to thank Kevin for correcting me because any non-Jewish person listening to this on YouTube would now know where we mean. so it does help. Chapter and verse, Kev. Deuteronomy chapter 19, verse 19. And the expression there is very, very clear. What does it say in Adam Zomimim? And you shall do to him as he plotted to do to his brother. So the very term that Hashem, the merciful one, called it an act of dichtiv, is an act of action. Hashem uses that term, to do. And unless Hashem used that term, Rav Chia could not mention it in his list. And it has other implications as well, by the way. It does. Because basically in Sanhedrin, it discusses whether a blasphemer and somebody that or curses, etc., using Hashem's name, one's parents, etc., does it count if it's only words, or does it count because it's seen as an action? So this issue of to do, tichtiv, means that there is an action associated with Adam Zomamim. So Rav Chia does put it in his list, and Hashem calls it an act. Now, let me tell you how exact and precise the words are, okay, without going off on a tangent too quickly, is that if, for example, you've got Adam Zomamim, and there's a couple that's accused of adultery, and she's a Bas Kohen, okay, the daughter of a Kohen, and he is a normal member of Israel. The sin for adultery is that she would get burnt because she's a daughter of a Kohen. She's got a much more stringent penalty, okay, with witnesses. And then the person that they're conspiring against would get stoned because he's not a Kohen. So now we ask, what happens with the Adam Zomamim? Because of the Adam Zomamim, they were found out during the trial of trying to get this couple the death penalty, and they hadn't committed an affair. Do we burn them like we would her if she was successfully convicted, or do we stone them like we would have done to him because he was not a Kohen? Because there's two different death penalties. Does that make sense? Because we have to do something to the Adam Zomamim in a death penalty case. Okay. So it's interesting here. The merciful one wrote, and you shall do to him as he plotted to do to his brother. And when it mentions the word to his brother, it implies what you intended to do to the male in this particular case gets done. So they get stoned. This is just a side note. And I'm saying it has an implication even in terms of the death penalty. So if it has an implication in terms of what death penalty, for sure wording has to do with in terms of financial payment. That's the only thing I wanted to bring to you guys. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, Gavin, Kevin, anything make sense here?
Right,
No, that makes sense.
Once again, the last sentence.
So what I'm saying is we discussed that even the word to his brother had an implication in terms of a death penalty case. Did you hear that whole thing, or did you miss it?
I missed some of it, yeah.
Okay, so the biblical verse says, and you shall do to him as he plotted to do
okay.
to his brother. Basically, were you looking at the source while we were speaking?
No, I must actually keep it with me and read it. I must keep from tomorrow.
Okay,
I must keep
all I'm saying is as follows, Kabb, without digressing too much, is that even the word to his brother has an implication in the death penalty of the Adam Zomamim on a couple committing adultery. So every word counts. That's all I was trying to say.
Okay.
And then now, what we're going to do now is the Gemara notes that both the list by Rav Ashaya and Rav Chia do not seem to possess all the attributes that primary damages must have. So what does it imply if I say the word primary damage? Primary. Let me emphasize that word. It means what did you say, Kevin and Gavin?
Main damage, like regel, shame.
Okay, but what does a primary mean? If I say they're primary folders on your hard drive, is the translation, but what does it imply? If I say they're categories on your hard drive, what does that imply sometimes? There are subcategories.
Yeah.
Which are folders.
Folders, yeah.
Yes, so whenever I say that Rav Ashai and Rav Chia considers these things primary categories, we ask where are their subcategories. That's what the Gemara wants to ask. Because according to the 4 primary categories listed in the Mishnah, there are subcategories. But according to Rav Chia and Rav Ashai's list, it implies that they're subcategories, but it's difficult because there are no subcategories. So what could primary damage also imply?
That there has to be subcategories.
Not necessarily. We said, now let's take the quote by Rab Abahu. So firstly, Rab Abahu said that when it talks about primary categories, it talks about cases that you pay from superior land. They all have to pay their damage from superior land. In other words, if you pay cash, pay cash. If you're going to pay from land, you have to pay from superior land. That's in the Mishnah. Whereas in the case of the Tordos, it's not always necessarily the case. Do you know what I'm saying? So this is according to Rav Abahu. And also remember, primary cases are cases that are brought forward in the Torah. So it doesn't necessarily mean that they're subcategories. If I say there's a folder on my laptop, it could be that there's no subcategories. But what we mean by primary categories is they all have their source in the Torah. And remember that creates the avos, the Torah source, and the Tordos are those that are conceptually extrapolated and rabbinic in nature from that concept of the avos in many cases. Do you get what I'm saying? So it doesn't mean it has to have Tordos or subcategories. It just means that there have to be primary categories because the primary categories talk about Torah-based sources. All have to be, and as Rav Abayu said, that they all pay from their damage from superior land when you're paying with land. Okay. Now, as Gavin once said, what happens if you don't have land? So obviously, if the Gemara and the later Mishnah are going to go through what if you got cash, what if you got grain, etc. But if you are paying with land, you have to pay with the most superior land that there is. And then it's also in terms of what do we comply with superior land. Now, we've got 10 minutes left, so I want to bring one particular point, and that is this. Is that how do we know this? Is because in the 33 cases not the 33 cases, apologies, in the 24 cases, as well as the 2 that are mentioned, the Gemara answers that it's derived through a Gezeira Shava involving the word Tachas, Nesina, Yeshalem, and Kesef. All right, so let me just explain to you what this means. In Exodus chapter 21, verse 36, it talks about an ox of a place of an ox. Remember that if you damage an ox, you have to replace that ox to that value, right? With the body, the gufa of the ox. That's when the ox is muad. It's not from the ox. It's actually with regards to you pay it with a muad ox from one's choice property. So tachas is the word in place of, and nasicha, which is in Exodus chapter 21. Colon 32, chapter 21, verse 32, it talks about 30 pieces of shekel he shall give Yatain to his master, which speaks of an ox that kills a Canaanite slave. And Yeshalem in Exodus chapter 24, verse 4, it talks about the choices of his vineyard he shall pay. Yeshalem, and that speaks of a case of Shain and Regel. Okay, remember when the case of Shain and Regel, when it does damage, you pay from the choices of the land for the damaged caused. And then Kesev in Exodus chapter 21, 34, it says, you shall return money Kesev. Now, just a bit of a side note, it doesn't have to follow any logical order. Whenever any of those 4 words are mentioned, that's a trigger that you pay from choice property land. Okay? And there was a case where I'm going to show you where it's mentioned in all of these custodians. I'm going to share my screen now, and then it's going to help you guys. Just give me 1 second. Okay. Let me just move this away. All right, guys, can you see the screen here?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, if you have a look in terms of this list, look at the Av. The Av, they're all Avs, which means they've all got a biblical source. This is the biblical source of the chapter and verse, and this is the key phrase. Remember, whenever you see Yeshalem, Tachas, Nesichan, Kesef, etc., this talks about the fact that you pay from choice land, and it's also giving the biblical source. So whenever you see this, you know you pay from choice land. Okay. This chart I've sent to you all on the Bava Kamma 1. Yeah. So we cool on that. I'm just trying to think how to share my screen. That would help. Okay, in terms of sharing, stop share. Okay, good. Sorry, guys, just give me a sec. All right, so that's at least a little bit helpful. And then, one thing I was going to mention is that when we're looking at that chart, it says in Leviticus, which is Vayikra, chapter 24, verse 20, it's stated in regard to a man who wounds his fellow, just as he will put a blemish in a person, so shall be put into him, given to him. So this is a discussion in terms of kesef, that giving refers to a monetary payment. So there's a mnemonic which says, in place of giving, he shall pay money. And when you use that word tachat, natina, yeshalem, kesef, those are the 4 words. And whenever that appears, we're talking about payment from choice land, and it appears in any of these biblical references on your chart. So that's all I wanted to mention to you guys. That's the sourcing of it. Okay? So that's cool. Are there any questions that any of you guys have? I mean, this is fairly straightforward, guys. It's not that complicated.
No, I think we're fine, though.
Fine.
Okay, that's fine. So I just wanted to obviously say that today's shiur had to do Margaret Kaplan's sister is still slipping in and out of a coma, so it is very serious. And we pray that this learning is a neshama for the neshama of Ruti Bat Malka, and that she makes a proper refuah, and this helps her neshama in every way.
Amen.
And one last note, I just wanted to wish my brother and Jackie 21st wedding anniversary.
Wow.
Some people 21 months, they did 21 years so far. Please God, may they spend their lifetimes together in happiness.
Amen.
Absolutely, amen. Well done. It's very difficult to do that.
Yeah, it's extremely, extremely rare. And I wanted to thank all of you guys for attending. And I understand, Michael, you couldn't. I hope your stresses have been sorted out.